I am very sympathetic to the social concerns of liberation theology. Now, what most people don't know is that the high point of liberation theology would have been the mid-70s to about 1990. So today, it really isn't around. I mean, it's left a legacy. And even on the ground in Latin America, it was very much of a marginal movement. You wouldn't know that if you didn't live in Latin America. Most of the Catholic Church was conservative, traditional. Most evangelicals were largely Pentecostal and not interested. A Peruvian missiologist friend of mine said something which is true. He said liberation theology opted for the poor, but the poor opted for the Pentecostal churches. I mean, they weren't involved. So I appreciate liberation theology for its concerns. The other thing that I appreciate about it, that they realized that to speak into the reality, they had to use the social sciences. Now, they chose certain kinds of Marxism, and most people don't realize that they were actually very specific in what aspects and what kinds of Marxism they chose. But be that as it may, even if you don't agree with that choice, the idea of using social analysis to understand the context into which you are going to speak makes sense, and we can learn from it. And then the other thing that I appreciated was that they began to ask the question, if we are committed to our context, how does that change how we understand and how we do theology? And we're seeing in this country with, let's say, the rise of certain kinds of African-American theology, Latino theology, they're asking the same question, you see. If we take the concerns of our people seriously, how does that impact theology and how does that impact church life and the ethics of the church? And I think that was a great legacy. So I appreciate some of the legacy. Some of them, again, last point, some of them opted, not all of them, but some of them opted for revolutionary violence. And this actually was an internal question which wasn't translated into English so much because Latin America, so not everything was translated into English. But one of the questions was, what were the limits of the violence that we could use? Is participation in a revolutionary movement legitimate or not? And if so, to what point? And so that's a very serious kind of question, you see. Will you pick up a gun as a Christian to change society? And that was the question some of them were having. So again, one thing are the concerns. Another thing is the strategy. Was the strategy a nonviolent one? And for some, it was not nonviolent. It was actually the choice for violence and joining guerrilla groups. So I would disagree with that. So you got all this going on. So it's a large discussion, but I've kind of narrowed it down to just a few points. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Delgado Podcast. As always, you can get the show notes, video links, and resources mentioned in this episode on my blog at mikedelgado.org. You can also get updates to new shows and get access to the full archive of past shows by following the Delgado Podcast on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And if you ever have suggestions for future topics or guests you want to hear from on this show, please reach out. My email is delgado@ucla.edu. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll chat more next time.